Hello everybody and welcome to Tiger Tales One Shot, a place you'll find one-off storylines written and read to you by your host, me, Tai Tiger. Today we're diving into Power Rangers Task Force Hojo, a team of Power Rangers built from across the multiverse with individual Rangers, and here we explain their individual backstories in one-off storylines. Here we have a Ranger who has a very unique ability, linking her to a unique clan, and she was taught by Cam, the Samurai Ranger from Ninja Storm. Without further ado, let's dive in. Power Rangers, the girl with the Sharingan eyes. Kotomi Uchiha sat there on the bench, eating her lunch alone. She often was alone. She had only been at the Wind Ninja Academy for 6 months, and still not had made any friends. She felt awkward around the other students. Most of them had been there since being children, or at least young teens. Kotomi was 17, had no idea she had powers or could be a ninja till 6 months ago. "Oi, Kotomi!" a boy yelled. Kotomi spun around on her bench and saw a small group of boys from her class. Kotomi sighed and rolled her eyes at the group of boys, often gave her a hard time. "What do you want, Jared?" Kotomi hissed. "I want you off my bench," the boy known as Jared sneered. Kotomi sat there and frowned. "I said move it, freak," Jared roared, stepping closer to Kotomi. Kotomi stood up and got right into Jared's face. "What are you going to do, Kotomi? Use your eyes on me?" Jared teased. Kotomi's side dropped back down to the bench. The boys all burst out laughing and they all turned around and started walking away. "Keep the bench. I wouldn't want to catch anything from sitting on it now anyway," Jared said as he walked off. The words freak and weirdo came from the crowd, and Kotomi picked up her sandwich and went to take a bite. Then Jared turned around and he stomped one foot on the ground, and the ground then aimed 2 fingers at Kotomi. Suddenly, a small yet powerful gust of wind blasted Kotomi's sandwich right out of her hand and splattered all over the floor. All the boys burst out into laughter once again. Kotomi stood up in rage. She climbed off the bench and glared at the boys. "What's the matter, Kotomi?" Jared asked through an evil grin. "Sharingan!" Kotomi whispered. Suddenly her eyes changed from green to a bright red, with 2 tear-shaped black Kotomi circled around her irises. The eyes glue bright. Then Kotomi bolted with such speed and appeared in the middle of the group of lads. She glazed her gaze around them. Within a second, she counted them. There were 6 boys in the group. She jumped up, swung her leg, kicking one boy in the head. He dropped to the floor with a loud thud. As she landed, she punched 2 boys in the groin, both the boys dropping to their knees. Then she turned around and punched a boy and then elbowed him as he stumbled backwards. She wrapped her arm around his neck, then flipped him over with ease, his body crashing onto the ground. Without a breath, she dived onto the floor and she climbed up his body, then wrapped her legs around his head. Then she flung her body weight backwards and she landed on her hands. She then swung her legs around. The boy flipped over. She then jumped to her feet and turned and swept her feet across the floor, tripping up the first boy who managed to stand up. She then dropped to his level and rapidly punched him in the face, chest and stomach. Then she climbed to her feet and turned to look at Jared. He stood there holding a thick branch in his hand as tightly as he could. Kotomi pulled the branch out of Jared's hands and threw it on the floor. She then walked up to him, looked straight into Jared's eyes, and Kotomi weaved several hand signs. Then Jared stopped dead and breathing increased. His forehead started sweating. He took 1 step backwards, then he started to scream. "Help! Help! There are Kelsaks everywhere! Help me! They're gonna get me!" Jared yelled. Jared then started swinging his hands around in a panicked state. Kotomi stood there grinning at the sight. "Stop this now!" a stern voice bellowed from behind them. Kotomi turned to see Cam Watanabe stood there. "Damn it," Kotomi muttered. She walked over to Jared as he started whimpering and trying to kick a tree. She placed her hand on his forehead and held 2 fingers up. "Released," she muttered, and Jared stopped what he was doing, and the other boys slowly climbed to their feet and all grouped up. "Bullying is not tolerated here. All 6 of you boys are on cleaning duty for a month, and you can start with the stables. I want them cleaned and the horses brushed. I want to be able to eat my blimmin' breakfast off the floor." Cam barked. The 6 boys all carried their sore bodies away, and Jared gave Kotomi a scared look. Cam then walked over to Kotomi as she looked down at the floor. Put your eyes away, Kotomi, then come sit with me, Cam said as he walked over to the bench and sat down. Kotomi took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Her Sharingan eyes disappeared, leaving her eyes her natural green colour. Then she walked over to the bench and sat next to Cam. You've been here for 6 months, Kotomi. You know we don't condone fighting unless it's training of some kind, Cam said. Sorry, Sensei, Kotomi muttered. I will let it slide this one time, Cam whispered. Kotomi grinned slightly. How did this even begin? Cam asked. He looked at Kotomi with an odd wrinkled face. His eyes were gentle and his grey hair was shiny in the sunlight. They started it, Kotomi muttered under her breath. Does that make them responsible for your actions? Cam asked. No, Kotomi sighed. I shall have words with them, don't worry, Cam said. Thanks, Kotomi replied. I understand things are hard, Kotomi, and I get your life was turned upside down when you witnessed Golgana killed your family. And I understand it's going to take you some time before you get there. But you need to learn, train, and you're the only one with the Sharingan, an ability lost forgotten, and the thought to have been wiped out completely when the Uchiha clan died out. Or shall I say, thought have been died out, Cam said to her. She shuddered as he spoke. Guessing Golgana hasn't been found yet, huh? Kotomi asked. No, not yet. Not that anyone here can do anything, Cam muttered in response. Am I honestly the only Uchiha? Kotomi asked. Yeah, we scoured the globe and no one has the same DNA to you except your dad, Cam said. Kotomi didn't respond, she just looked at the ground. I see the confirmation papers came through. You're officially Uchiha now, Cam said as he nudged her on the shoulder. I did. I am officially Uchiha. With my family gone, I wanted to feel more part of something. Carrying the name of a dead lost clan kinda seemed pretty cool. Kotomi smiled. Cam gave her a weak smile back. I am proud of you, Kotomi, Cam said. Several hours later, Kotomi was sat there watching the sun set. She focused on her breathing. She was sat on the roof of the girls' sleeping quarters. She looked over the forest, and then she saw a few figures walking through the trees. She could hear them laughing. Then she caught one of their faces. It was Jared's sidekicks. Kotomi huffed, then she jumped off the roof and landed on the ground. Let's see what they're up to, Kotomi muttered to herself. She then jumped up and landed on a tree branch. She then jumped forward to the next one, and she kept hopping from branch to branch, tree to tree, with increased speed. Within a few moments she had caught up to the boys, and Jared with his minions were messing around with fireworks. Yeah, great plan, lads. Play with fireworks in the middle of the forest, Kotomi muttered to herself. The boys were laughing and joking. The whistle of the fireworks echoed, then was followed by a colourful bang. Kotomi sat on a tree branch watching the fireworks as they went off. She nodded to herself as the fireworks show was actually rather impressive. Kotomi was watching when suddenly she felt awfully cold. Confused settled in as it was the summer nights and it should have been rather warm, but yet Kotomi could see her breath leave her mouth. She looked around as the boys had also noticed this. Then she saw it. Kotomi was frozen with fear as she saw the monster glide through the forest and head straight for the boys. She tried to scream, call out to them, but her voice box had closed itself from her. Her mouth was dry and her eyes were glued open as she watched Golgana walk up to the boys. The boys finally noticed her and threw their clothes off, revealing their ninja suits. They all ran at Golgana, who blocked all of their attacks. She looked like a model with the neck down of a Greek stone marble, and her face looked like a mask being shattered, revealing an ugly woman with multiple teeth, and her hands were claws, and her hair was made of stone. Golgana blocked one of the boys, then grabbed him by the throat. She lifted him off the ground and inhaled, and Kotomi watched as his soul ripped from his mouth and flew into Golgana. Kotomi tried to move, but her feet was frozen to the trees. She was unable to move. Her body would not follow her commands. She couldn't move, she couldn't scream, and in her mind she demanded her legs to move, but they were unresponsive. She watched Golgana as she threw the shriveled husk of the boy's lifeless body to one side. She darted forward, she kicked one boy to the floor, jumped on top of him and absorbed his soul shriveling up as it went into Golgana, and his body now nothing but a lifeless husk. Kotomi watched as Golgana took her third victim. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered the vow she took 6 months ago that she would avenge her parents and her brother, and this was her chance. She finally jumped off the branch and landed on the ground. She looked straight at the monster as she took her fourth victim's soul. She dropped the body and looked at Kotomi. You... Golgana hissed. Leave him alone, Kotomi stuttered quietly. What's that? Gonna have to speak up, my dear. Gorgana hissed. Gorgana moved with such speed and stopped centimeters away from Kotomi's face. She could feel the monster's cold and harsh breath on her face. She turned her head, looking away from the monster. Yeah, that's what I thought. You're just as pathetic as you were 6 months ago. Gorgana hissed with glee. Suddenly a rock flew and smashed across the monster's head. The monster turned around and saw one of the boys stood there. Then Jared threw his 2 fingers forward and a blast of wind hit the monster straight in the chest. But Gorgana stood there not fazed by the attacks. Gorgana bolted to the boys, grabbed them both and started sucking the souls out of them. She dropped the one boy who was left as a husk and focused on draining Jared. He started screaming as he held his hand out. Kotomi stood there watching as the monster dropped Jared's body on the floor, now soulless. Tasty, Gorgana hissed. Kotomi shook her head. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Sharingan, Kotomi muttered. As she opened her eyes, they turned from her natural green to her bright glowing red Sharingan eyes. You have the Sharingan, the Geki Genkai long thought to be forgotten. You're a Uchiha, Gorgana said. Damn straight. And I'm gonna stop you, Kotomi yelled. She took a deep breath and took her fighting stance. She bolted for the monster. She roared out as she punched the marble monster. The monster blocked the attack, then kicked Kotomi in the stomach and backhanded her, sending her flying and crashing into a tree. Kotomi climbed to her feet. Gorgana flew at her, punching her right in the stomach and knocking the wind out of her. She went to punch her again, but this time Kotomi managed to throw her hands down, pushing the incoming punch away. She jumped up and kneed the monster in the face. Then in midair, she spun around and kicked the monster in the head. Gorgana stumbled back, then growled at her. Gorgana then threw another punch, but to Kotomi she moved extremely slow. Her Sharingan eyes had slowed things down for her. She managed to block the attack, then the next one, then the next. She stood there blocking each punch the monster threw at her. Kotomi smirked, then she grabbed the monster by the fist and spun her around, throwing her into a tree. Gorgana growled once again. You're not meant to hurt me, the monster hissed. Oops, Kotomi said sarcastically. Gorgana stood there for a few seconds. I will return, Uchiha. I shall rip you apart. Your beloved academy will be next, and by sunrise, you both will be dead. Gorgana sneered. Then in a flash of purple, she teleported away. Kotomi stood there for a moment in a daze. Then she snapped out of it and ran to the husk that was once Jared. She touched the skin and gasped at how cold it was. Kotomi held her head in her hands, tears filling her eyes. The Sharingan faded away, and she then stood and ran back to the academy to find Cam. Cam stood there holding a crying Kotomi. I tried, she muttered through her tears. Hey, it's okay, Cam whispered. Kotomi pushed away from Cam, shaking her head. Sensei, she'll be here by dawn, Kotomi yelled. Well, if you want to stop and listen to me, Cam said. Kotomi stopped and took a deep breath. Then Cam turned around and walked away. Kotomi looked confused and ran after him. He led her into his studies, where he pulled a book from the shelf, which made a whole shelf move to one side. Kotomi didn't ask any questions, just followed her sensei down the revealed set of stairs. 30 years ago, my uncle attacked the academy, and I helped form the Ninja Storm Power Rangers. The 3 Wind Rangers, the Thunder Brothers, and myself was the Green Samurai. We defeated Lothar, and our Ranger powers were destroyed, but my father and I also made safety measures so we could tap into the morphing grid and make new morphers similar to our old ones, Kami explained. Yeah, I know this. It was in the history lessons. Everyone knows this, Kotomi said as she followed him down the stone staircase, lights flickering on as they walked down. Well, when we brought you in, my sensors told me your body could handle the power of the morphing grid, Cam told her. They reached a metal door and Cam pressed his hand on the panel on the left side and it scanned his hand. Then the door swung open, revealing a room with several computer screens, a keyboard, several display cases with different ranger weapons, which were battered and scorched, filled the walls. I can tap into the morphing grid? Kotomi asked as she looked around the room. Yes, and your unique genetic makeup allowed me to make something unique and very powerful, Cam explained. You mean my Sharingan? Kotomi sighed. Yes, but with it you can become a Power Ranger. Cam grinned. Wait, really? Kotomi gasped. Cam rushed to one of the display cases, opened it, and pulled a small black box out and presented it to Kotomi on the table. What's this? Kotomi asked as she sat down. Okay, to tap into the morphing grid, you'll need a morpher. But I built this one that would only work with you, because it can only be activated once it's connected to a Sharingan, Cam explained. Then he flipped open the small box to reveal a morpher. It resembled the Ninja Storm Wind morphers, but it was blue and white in colour, and the power disc was bigger in the shape of a black shuriken. The centre of the disc had the Sharingan eye on it. That's for me? Kotomi asked, her mouth dropped to the floor. Yes. Use it and tap it into the morphing grid and become the Sharingan Ranger, Cam said. Kotomi just looked at the morpher, doubt tracing her mind. Kotomi, you can do this. She hasn't destroyed you for some reason, and she's coming here. She could be here any minute. We can fight her, but her powers are too strong. And like I said, my powers are destroyed, and none of my students have the strength, the dedication, or the spirit you do when it comes to your training, Cam told her. Kotomi took a deep breath. She knew Cam was right. She had to beat Kurogane. She had to avenge her family and the lives of the students as well. Kotomi picked up the morpher and strapped it to her wrist. Suddenly, a red light flashed on the computer screen, lighting up the camera footage. Cam rushed over to the keyboard and pressed several keys. The screen changed to reveal Kurogane at the gates. She was fighting the guards and several students, and the academy was fading against a marble monster. Looks like I gave that to you just in time, Cam said. Then he pulled out the small earpiece and gave it to Kotomi. I'll be here guiding you, Cam said. Kotomi put the earpiece in her ear, and then she hugged Cam, and then she ran out of the secret room. She found her way back to the main academy building and rushed to the main entrance. As she rushed outside, she found Kurogane draining the soul of a student. Kotomi stopped, and the only thing keeping her safe at this second in time was the distance with a set of steps and a courtyard dividing them. Kurogane dropped the body, which was now a husk, and turned to Kotomi. I told you I'd be here, Kurogane hissed. Yeah, and I'm gonna stop you, Kotomi yelled. You no longer smell of fear. Aren't you scared of me? Kurogane asked. Kotomi looked down at her wrist, looking at the Sharingan morpher. No. Guess I'm not, Kotomi muttered. It's only been a few hours. What's changed? Kurogane asked as she slowly started advancing forward. She lifted her hand, revealing her morpher. I've evened out the playing field, Kotomi said. Cam's voice came through the earpiece, telling her how to activate her morpher. Thanks, Sensei, Kotomi grinned. Kotomi closed her eyes. Sharingan, she whispered. Then her eyes lit up as they became bright red as the Sharingan glowed. Kurogane stood there in confused but rather intrigued. Kotomi placed her morpher down to her wrist and raised the other hand up, pointing 2 fingers into the air. Uchiha born, she called out. Then she swung her morpher to the side of her waist, bringing her 2 fingers down. Ranger form, she called out. Then she brought her morpher back out to the right side and threw a punch forward, gliding the side of the morpher with her 2 fingers, her fingers spinning the shuriken-shaped disc as they did. She spun the disc with great speed. Everything went red, several crows spun around Kotomi, and her Power Ranger suit formed over her. The visor closed, and the crows and the red veil disappeared. Kotomi stood there. Her suit resembled the Blue Ninja Storm Power Ranger suit, but this time it was black and white, and had features of slightly different helmet, and the Sharingan placed on her chest. Kotomi dropped into her fighting stance. Power of the Sharingan, the Sharingan Ranger called out. What? A Power Ranger? How has this happened? Kurogane screamed. She growled in anger, then ran at the Ranger. The Sharingan Ranger dropped down and dodged the monster's strike. She then kicked the monster, spun around and kicked the monster again. She punched the monster twice in quick succession. Kurogane stumbled backwards. The Sharingan Ranger jumped up, kicked the marble monster in the face. As she landed, she rolled forward and blocked the punch before she then punched the monster in the stomach, then swung for her face, but the monster bolted for the roof, becoming a purple blur. The Sharingan Ranger stumbled forward as she missed her attack. She turned around to see the purple blur bolting up the building. Her Sharingan slowed the movement of the monster, allowing her to see the monster clearly. The Sharingan Ranger then bolted after her, becoming a black blur. She quickly caught up, and the 2 blurs quickly bounced off of each other each time they clashed, the Sharingan Ranger and Kurogane striking one another. They both landed on the roof. Kurogane ran at the Ranger and dived at it, grabbing a hold of the Ranger's waist, both of them falling back down to the ground. Sharingan Ranger held 2 fingers up and exploded in a puff of smoke, and Kurogane was holding a thick log instead. What? She gasped. Then the Sharingan Ranger appeared behind Kurogane, both Ranger and monster still falling. She grabbed Kurogane by the arms and held them behind her back. Then she threw her weight to one side, making them both start spinning. Their trajectory shifted, so they were both spinning and falling straight down. Just before they hit the ground, the Sharingan Ranger pushed off Kurogane, and Kurogane hit the ground hard. The Sharingan Ranger bolted off the wall and landed gently on her feet. She watched as Gorgana climbed to her feet, and pieces of her face, which resembled the mask being torn apart, had shattered, leaving nothing but a horrible mouth with several layers of teeth, and the still marble headpiece was a horrific sight. "How dare you!" Gorgana screeched in pain. Suddenly, the mouth started glowing purple, and lightning erupted from it and hit the walls, the trees, and the ground, and then the Sharingan Ranger. She tried to move out the way, but the lightning hit her, sending her flying back and smashing into a tree. Gorgana unleashed more lightning at the Ranger. Explosions erupted as the Sharingan Ranger was flung into the air and dropped to the ground with a hard thud. The Ranger called out in pain as it rippled through her. "You will fall by my final attack!" Gorgana screamed as she started hobbling closer. The mouth on her head started glowing. "Kotomi, you have a final strike as well," Cam's voice said, coming through her earpiece. "Yeah, of course," the Sharingan Ranger gasped as she climbed to her feet. The Sharingan Ranger jumped high in the air and removed the Sharingan disc from her morpher. She then spun it around and threw the shuriken at Gorgana. She then weaved several hand signs together. "Phoenix Flower Jutsu, final attack!" the Sharingan Ranger called out, and suddenly the spinning shuriken burst into flames and multiplied into several flaming shuriken. The flock of flaming shurikens rained down on Gorgana, each one striking Gorgana, until finally the original one hit Gorgana. The Shuriken Ranger landed as she watched the monster stumble forward towards her. The Shuriken disc flew back to the Ranger, and she caught it and placed it back on her morpher. Gorgana stumbled forward and fell to her knees. The Shuriken Ranger walked up to the monster. "How did you beat me?" Gorgana grunted. "I gained something that you would never understand," the Shuriken Ranger replied. "And what's that?" Gorgana grunted. "I gained courage," the Shuriken Ranger said. Then with a finger she pushed Gorgana over, and her marble body shattered into pieces with a puff of purple smoke leaving the remains. "Power down," the Ranger called out as she demorphed, and her eyes returned to normal. Kotomi walked away from the battle scene and went back to Cam. She walked in and Cam rushed to her. "You did it! You actually did it!" Cam cheered. "Yeah, I did," Kotomi grinned. She went to take off the morpher, but Cam stopped her. Whoa, it's yours," Cam said. "Really? I get to keep it?" Kotomi said, shocked. "It's linked to someone who has the Sharingan. It only works for you. Besides, I think we'll need you again," Cam replied. "What, you mean you might need me again?" Kotomi asked. "I haven't turned on this computer since my father died. I only come down here when I build morphers and weapons, which usually leads me nowhere. Well, when you defeated Gorgana, I checked my communications with this computer, and I've had messages from other academies, and from other rangers. They need help, and I think all I have to give them is you," Cam told Kotomi. Kotomi stood there, her body ached from the fight. She looked down at her morph on her wrist. Her mother and father's faces appeared in her mind, and for the first time in 6 months, she could see their smiles, their eyes lighting up. She could hear their voices. They weren't crying or calling out in pain. Instead, they were laughing. She could hear them laughing and cheering. Kotomi looked at her morpher, then looked back up to her sensei. "When do I start?" Kotomi said with a slight grin. Thank you everybody for listening to this video and checking out the stories. Of course, there are plenty more where that came from. I encourage you to check out the rest of this channel where you'll find more storylines for you to delve into. But there's even more than that. If you check out the description down below, you will find a whole array of different Tiger Tales channels. Each Tiger Tales channel is made for a specific purpose and hosts a whole array of different types of storylines. So I encourage you to check out the other Tiger Tales channels and delve into a massive amount of storytelling by myself and the Tiger Tales partners. If you have enjoyed yourself today, then please subscribe to the channel, as it does show your support. Now, of course, the whole reason why I'm doing this is because I'm passionate about story writing and storytelling. And, of course, you should dive into what you are passionate about as well. So, I shall end this video with Roll with Passion.
That before we can...
Don't touch my Pringles.
Bye!